Professor Nam-yong Lee's long commentary. Are the Republic of Korea's conservatives the guardians of the system, while the center and progressives become forces of subversion? 0. A remarkable people, yet naive before the system. Greetings, this is Nam-yong Lee of Lee Nam-yong Professor TV. I am convinced that the Korean people are among the most outstanding in the world. In terms of educational attainment, IT literacy, diligence on the industrial front lines, and the creativity that has produced K-culture, we are second to none. And yet there is an irony. In economics, technology and culture we excel, but when it comes to the political system and the state, there are far too many moments when we behave with astonishing naivety. We do not think deeply about how the strategies, tactics and operations that undermine the system actually work, nor about who is shaking the Republic of Korea with which ideology and under the logic of unrestricted warfare. Instead, we cast our votes and are swept along by public opinion according to the emotions and images of the moment. In this commentary, I wish to state clearly the uncomfortable truth as I see it. In today's Korea, the conservative right of center camp functions as the force defending the liberal democratic system, while the centrist and progressive left of center camps, whether by deliberate intent or by being used, in effect operate as components of a system subverting force. This struggle is not a simple contest over changing governments. It is a full-spectrum confrontation between those who seek to defend the constitutional order of the Republic of Korea and those who seek to alter or dismantle it, intertwined with China's deceptive strategy of unrestricted warfare. At the center of this war lies the philosophy of relations, which I have studied for decades. Unrestricted warfare and systemic war. Who is aiming for what? In 1999, Chinese People's Liberation Army officers Qiao Liang and Wang Xiangshui advanced the concept of unrestricted warfare, arguing for a form of limitless war that mobilizes every instrument, military, economic, diplomatic, financial, cyber, informational, cultural, legal, so as to destroy an adversary's system without necessarily resorting to conventional armed conflict. The core of unrestricted warfare is simple. Expand the battlefield from the military domain to the entirety of society. Instead of tanks and guns, turn the economy, public opinion, law, media, cyberspace, and culture into weapons. Today, the front line is no longer just the barbed wire fence of the DMZ, the National Assembly, the courts, newsrooms, web portals, and YouTube, classrooms and universities, civic organizations, and even chat apps and messengers have all become battlefields. On top of this lies what I call systemic war. Systemic war is not a war of objects that asks who occupies the Blue House or the presidential office. It is a war over the very principles by which the entire relational architecture is designed. The relationship between state and citizen, power and law, class and generation and region, fact and public sphere and platform. The questions thus become clear. Who understands the deceptive logic of unrestricted warfare and in the face of it struggles to defend the liberal democratic system? Conversely, who, whether out of intention or ignorance, has joined hands with this unrestricted warfare-style strategy of systemic subversion and is gnawing away at the system from within? My conclusion is dispassionate but unequivocal. The conservative right-of-centre camp is the system-defending force. The centrist and progressive left-of-centre camps, whatever they may call themselves, are in practice functioning as parts of a system-subverting force. From here on, I will unpack this proposition using the language of the philosophy of relations and the framework of strategy, tactics, and operations. 2. The four axes of relations, the strategy of unrestricted warfare and the subversive role of the center and left. From the perspective of relational philosophy, systemic war unfolds along four critical axes. First, the relationship between power and the people. Second, the relationships among social classes, generations, and regions. Third, the relationship between facts, the public sphere, and platforms. Fourth, the relationship among law, power, and institutions. The architects of unrestricted warfare do not seek to smash these four axes outright. Instead, they pursue a strategy of gradual decay. In that process, it becomes visible how the centrist and progressive, left-of-center forces become instruments of systemic subversion. 2-1, power and the people. Conservatives as shield, center, and left as midwives of a state-dependent citizenry. The strategy of the unrestricted warfare camp is to transform the relationship between state and citizen from one of trust and responsibility into one of fear and transaction, by exaggerating or selectively amplifying every type of crisis, economic shocks, security threats, disasters, pandemics. They keep citizens in a constant state of anxiety and fear. Within that atmosphere, they inject the message, only this government, only this state can protect you. Through the politically calibrated distribution of taxes, subsidies, welfare, and support funds, they reduce citizens from sovereign subjects to mere customers of the state. When the progressive, left-of-center discourse on welfare and redistribution is layered on top of this, it unintentionally feeds this strategy of systemic subversion with direct fuel. The demands of give us more, protect us more, let the state intervene more, inevitably enlarge state power and tend to turn citizens from free agents into dependent objects. Progressives speak of reducing inequality, but in practice they often reinforce a vertical domination structure in the state-citizen relationship. What about the center? The centrist impulse is almost always to say, we dislike conflict, we are tired of political fights, we just want to live quietly. This easily translates into support for a managerial state. It would be better if the state managed things a bit more. The government should step in and coordinate. In the end, although the centre and the left use different vocabularies, they converge in supporting the hypertrophy of state power and thereby help create precisely the kind of state-dependent citizenry that the unrestricted warfare strategists desire. The conservative, right-of-centre mission is, in essence, quite different. The state should be strong, but citizens must not be treated as objects of control. They must be regarded as partners in responsibility. Security and the rule of law must be upheld, but information should be disclosed and choices left with the people. Rather than expanding the role of the state, conservatives ought to enlarge the space for individual freedom and voluntary social cooperation. When conservatism returns to this original calling, it becomes the only effective shield along the axis of power and the people. 2-2. Class, generation and region. The citizen versus citizen, war that unrestricted warfare desires. The most efficient way to subvert a system is not to incite citizens to fight the state, but to incite citizens to fight one another. Here the strategy of the unrestricted warfare camp is crystal clear. They inflame generational conflict, youth versus elderly, class conflict, regular versus irregular workers, gangnam versus non-gangnam, conglomerates versus the self-employed, and regional conflict, Yeongnam versus Honam, metropolitan area versus provinces. All of these are amplified through the language of resentment and contempt until each individual lives inside the perception, I am the victim, they are the perpetrators. The progressive, left-of-centre inequality discourse then plugs into this machinery. Progressives are often adept at seeing structural inequality. That is a genuine strength, but if their solutions always and only take the form of a larger state, stronger regulation, greater redistribution, more aggressive purges of vested interests, society is driven not toward solidarity, but toward an endless cycle of retribution. In that process, the dichotomy of entrenched interests versus victims becomes entrenched, and citizens are fragmented into combat units fighting solely for the narrow interests of their own group. Once again, the centre makes a naive choice. It looks away from the core of these conflicts and repeats the vacuous refrain, "Let's all compromise a little, let's seek a reasonable middle ground." But it remains silent about redesigning the underlying opportunity structure. In the end, the structure is left intact while only the surface emotions are temporarily covered over. What follows is predictable. Trust and solidarity among classes, generations, and regions collapse. Behind the scenes of citizen versus citizen warfare, the unrestricted warfare strategists and domestic system subverting forces quietly re-engineer the system itself. By contrast, the role of the conservative, right-of-center, system-defending camp is clear. Instead of provoking emotional conflict, it must use data and architectural tools to reveal exactly where the opportunity map is blocked. Conflicts between regular and irregular workers, between the capital region and the provinces, between youth and the elderly must be shifted from politics of mutual vilification to politics of jointly dismantling and redesigning the structure. If conservatives fail to play this role, the language of the centre and left will continue to pit citizens against each other, and the result will be tactical victories for the system-subverting forces. Orisami. Facts, the public sphere and platforms. Truth disappears. Algorithms decide the system. In today's systemic war, the most frightening battlefield is not marked by gunfire, tanks, or missiles. It is the realm of the public sphere and digital platforms. The strategy of the unrestricted warfare camp is straightforward. Do not smash truth. Design a structure in which truth simply cannot be seen. They co-opt or intimidate the media, platforms, and influential voices to create echo chambers in which only one narrative is repeated. Their aim is not just to circulate a few blatant falsehoods, but to produce half-truths. 50% fact combined with a carefully edited context, that amount to distorted reality. They make search, recommendation, and exposure algorithms opaque so that citizens cannot discern what truly matters. Here the roles of the left and centre once again intersect. Progressives, in the name of regulating fake news, risk enacting laws and systems that shrink the space for freedom of expression and genuine diversity of opinion. Centrists, citing political fatigue, withdraw from the public sphere altogether, thereby effectively handing that sphere over to algorithms and demagogues. The result is that citizens cease to be subjects who verify facts. They become objects that merely react to stimuli thrown up by opaque algorithms. In response, what must the conservative system-defending camp do? It must demand at least a minimal level of algorithmic transparency and independent auditing from media and platforms. It must work to establish a public sphere algorithm norm that lays out, before the citizenry, the principles and procedures according to which content is suppressed or amplified. At the same time, it must push for full open access to national statistics and public data so that citizens themselves can see and analyze reality. In short, conservatives must design an architecture that reconnects facts, data, and relations in order to reclaim the public sphere. 2 to 4, law, power, and institutions, leaving the shell of the rule of law while emptying its substance. The final axis is the relationship among law, power, and institutions. The common strategy of unrestricted warfare and domestic system subverting forces can be summed up as follows. Leave the wording of the Constitution and laws intact, but quietly alter the relationships and practices operating within them. They handle politically sensitive cases differently at each stage of investigation, prosecution, trial, and enforcement. Through personnel decisions, budget allocations, and organizational restructuring, they send invisible signals into the judicial and prosecutorial systems. They place system-subverting sympathizers in key positions within commissions, oversight bodies, and nominally independent agencies, thereby turning checks and balances into a hollow puppet show. Progressives, left of centre, under the banners of cleansing past evils and realizing justice, often actively participate in this process. They justify selective investigations, tax audits, and inspections targeting certain camps, classes, or groups. They shout, "Apply the law strictly," at figures from the opposing camp, yet cry political retaliation when the law reaches into their own. Centrists remain silent or dismiss the matter with, "Both sides are problematic. I'm just tired of politics," and thus end up abetting the erosion of the rule of law. By contrast, the conservative system defending camp must redesign the law-power institutional relationship from the perspective of a rule of law architecture. It must ensure that every stage, investigation, prosecution, adjudication, and enforcement is continuously captured in data and statistics so that citizens themselves can see who stands above the law. It must decentralize personnel and budgetary authority so that no single administration can wield the prosecutorial and judicial apparatus as a political weapon. At this point in history, conservatism is the final bulwark protecting the system, while the center and left are becoming the forces punching holes in that bulwark. Strategy, tactics, and operations contrasting the two camps. Let us now summarize, in the language of relational philosophy, the structural difference between system-defending conservatism and system-subverting centrism and progressivism in terms of strategy, tactics, and operations. 3-1. The pattern of the system-subverting camp, center and left plus unrestricted warfare. The strategy of the system-subverting camp is to quietly redesign the state-citizen relationship into one of dependence and fear, the class-generation-region nexus into one of hatred and conflict, the realm of facts and the public sphere into spaces governed by algorithms, and the relationship among law, power, and institutions into one of privilege and selective enforcement. Tactically, they deploy moral language, inequality and discrimination, safety and welfare, justice and the elimination of deep-rooted evils to inflame public anger. Yet their solutions consistently trend toward a larger state, tighter regulation, and more pervasive control. They blend populist welfare with cultural warfare, legal warfare, and information warfare to erode the system from within. At the operational level, in every election, they mobilize fear, hatred, and rage to the maximum. They deploy the judiciary, media platforms, and civic organizations as combat units to conduct witch hunts against the opposing camp. All the while, the text of the Constitution and statutes remains unchanged, preserving the outward appearance of democracy. 3-2. The tasks and responsibilities of the system-defending conservative camp. Conversely, the strategy, tactics, operations of the conservative, right-of-center camp must be formulated as follows. At the strategic level, conservatism must cease to treat citizens as objects of control and instead elevate them as subjects in the design of relationships. It must co-design with the people a framework of freedom and responsibility, the rule of law and fair opportunity. It must redesign the relationships among state and citizen, classes and generations, facts and the public sphere, law and power in accordance with global standards. At the tactical level, conservatism must speak not in the language of fear and hatred, but in the language of data and design. It must move beyond who is bad to ask which structures are wrong and how shall we change them. It must present to youth, the working poor, small business owners, and the middle class a concrete map of opportunities that this system can and must provide. At the operational level, conservatism must translate its ideas into actionable policy and legislation, a digital freedom charter, an opportunity map, a rule of law architecture, and a public sphere algorithm norm, 4 pillars of relational reform. In every election, it must foreground not defending our administration, but defending the system and redesigning relations. It must also have the courage to excise, openly and transparently, the privileges and corruption within its own ranks, Only when conservatism walks this path will the proposition conservatism equals system-defending force become a lived reality. 4. A question to a remarkable yet naive citizenry. Let us return to where we began. Our people are remarkable. Yet, from the vantage point of systemic war, our literacy regarding politics and systems remains dismayingly low. How often do we cast our votes based on who will give us more immediate benefits, who will punish our enemies more harshly, who will shout our anger more loudly on our behalf? From the perspective of relational philosophy, Korea's choice at this moment is stark and simple. First, will we rebuild a liberal democratic system defense front centered on the conservative, right-of-center camp and redesign the four axes of relations in line with global standards? Second, or will we neglect, or even abet, the unrestricted warfare-style path of systemic subversion led by the centrist and progressive left-of-center camps? This is not fundamentally a question about party labels. It is a question about the relational structure in which we wish to live, and about whether citizens will stand as subjects or sink back into objects. Panchwan, conclusion. The outcome of the systemic war ultimately depends on the awakening of the people. The Republic of Korea already stands in the midst of a quiet systemic war. China's unrestricted warfare deception, the system-subverting rhetoric of the domestic left and center, and the indecision and self-deception of the conservative camp are all entangled. In this commentary, I have stated my view plainly. The conservative right-of-center camp is the system-defending force. The centrist and progressive left-of-center camps, whether intentionally or not, are functioning as parts of a system-subverting force. Yet the final verdict rests on one unchanging fact. Whether the system is preserved or destroyed will not be decided by politicians alone, but by the choices of each and every citizen. When honest citizens begin to demand data, to ask for the blueprints of relational design, to insist on both freedom and responsibility, and to participate around a conservative system-defending center in the redesign of our relationships, then neither unrestricted warfare from abroad nor system-subverting forces at home will be able to shake this nation at will. The battle has already begun. When our people finally open their eyes, Korea's systemic war can and will end in victory for liberal democracy. Let us ensure that we leave to our descendants a future that we need not regret. Thank you for watching this long commentary by Professor Nam Yong Lee.